He takes pieces of history and turns them into new creations. Some complete with functionality, others stunning in their craftsmanship. On this edition of Art Now, we'll look at the work of Jon Bryan.
Welcome to Art Now. Our guest is a very interesting artist and historian. He has a real interest in doorknobs and woodworking and putting these together in a very unique way. His name is Jon Bryan, and he's with Hobnob Art. And we'd like to welcome you, Jon, to our Art Now show.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here.
How did you get interested in this form of art with these wonderful doorknobs, these historical doorknobs, and putting them together with wood and your talent in wood? How did you get started in that?
Well, it's not an easy, short answer,
That's
Jenny.
okay.
I have to say that it goes back to perhaps my interest in the period out of which these knobs come, which is the what is called the era of the Gilded Age between the Civil War and the First World War in American history. That's where I got a master's degree and wrote a master's thesis on an architect of that period, Ralph Adams Cram, and his non-professional thought. So I've had kind of a lifelong interest in that period. But as far as this particular expression of labor here, this took place several years ago, reading an issue of This Old House. And Amy Hughes out of New York City generally does the salvage column for This Old House. And I noticed, I think it was something like 5 or 6 years ago, she ran one on architectural hardware. And it caught my attention, the doorknobs that they have. And of course, the East Coast of New York, they had a wonderful display that she featured in this one issue of This Old House.
Great.
And it caught me. So as I saw that, it took some time to get something behind it, but I started investigating, and that's where this came in.
Okay.
So I began to learn that these knobs have basically come about after the Civil War.
Okay.
The porcelain knobs, as you see the black one up there, predate the Civil War.
Wow.
They, out of mineral clay and porcelain, and I didn't know that, but they're the oldest knobs. In the United States, knobs generally were not used up until that time. They were latches or handles or latch work on doors. But these things doorknobs became more of a feature. The parlance is architectural jewelry. And during a time when people were becoming more interested in doing something distinctive in their homes, and it was a different era than pre-Civil War, then these companies sprang up that furnished this distinctive form of adorning their architectural dwelling places and institutions. And that's what got me going.
Well, they are great, and they're also unique, and they have such an interesting history about them.
Yes.
Tell us about some of these.
Well, for these that are displayed here, these are cast brass knobs, and they are unique, as I mentioned earlier, from the Civil War to the First World War. There were those who were craftsmen who used their artisanship and their abilities to make molds for these early companies, which were centered largely on the South Shore of Connecticut. There were a few, like the Metal Compression Casting Company up in Boston, or F.C. Lind in New Jersey, who were out of the neighborhood. But a lot of those were on the South Shore of Connecticut. So folks like Branford Lock Works, or Lockwood in Norwalk, Connecticut, or some of the others like Sargent Company. They sprang up to make hinges, doorknobs, lock sets, and they would custom them for the interest of people who had the ability and the sense of elegance to adorn their homes.
So what are these different patterns that they have on here?
That's a very good question. For instance, this knob here is an example of a Branford knob. This, as you can see, has a flat edge, and it's a drum style knob. These were unique to that time. You don't see them nowadays. They're mostly round and dome-like.
Right.
As opposed to the drum.
That's the flat.
That's correct. So this features a certain pattern that people prized at that time.
Okay.
And there was a larger consciousness during this period, not only of the growing prosperity that was beginning to take place with early manufacturing, but also the world was opening up after the Civil War.
Right.
So people were conscious not only of Europe, and there was still some reaction against the old country and the fact that with Manifest Destiny and the West Coast and opening up the West during this time, we were thinking of ourselves. But beyond that, there were others who were thinking of the Orient. And of larger horizons that went to the east. And Branford captured that by making this what is called the bamboo pattern.
Okay.
This features a rising sun, an open fan, and a bamboo plant. And this would be captured in 3 or 4 different knob styles. In the dome and in the drum style. They would make it in brass, they would make it in cast iron, depending on the house and the application.
Really?
And so people would prize that, and it was a genteel and a covered way of just wordlessly identifying yourself with being knowledgeable about a larger world to guests and family who were coming into the place, or to an institution that would want these things on their openings.
How about those up above there? Those are then...
These are Branfords as well. They have the brass band on the side, and they're brass throughout with a black enamel, and they're raised. This comes from a butterfly pattern that came with a larger knob, and these are passage size knobs. This is an entry size knob, which is larger, which come on an exterior door. This is for what we're all familiar with, the regular interior passage knob. And this is a 4-fold symmetry with this kind of floral or butterfly design that was very popular during that time, or at least popular among those who could order these things and have them. And this is what is featured here with this particular Branford knob. They would have a catalog of different styles and patterns that they would make available to people who had discriminating taste. The things that I like about, the things that really distinguish a knob, whether it's better or less distinctive, not quite as expensive, is that they would also be patterned on the back. So you could feel that when you put your hand on there. That's part of the period that I look back fondly of. Because we live in an era now where everything is out in the open. And people are extremely personal and expressive. Back then it was more covered. It was genteel and it was discreet. So they would have these features, these gems on their doors, where they would just quietly and wordlessly let people know who they are.
And if people were the same, they could identify that too.
That's correct.
Part of the
That's
same
exactly right.
Well, you have more knobs here, and so we want to talk more about the knobs themselves. But you have combined this wonderful knowledge of these knobs during that particular time period, and worked with art, with wood, to make it an artistic and a functional piece. So how do you decide? Tell us about this. How do you decide whether to make this functional, a shelf, or just a piece of work on the art, or on the wall, or even a vase? You have some of these that you've turned into some lovely vases. So how do you decide what you're going to do with these pieces?
Well, Ginny, originally I started with this. This is
Okay.
what Amy Hughes wrote about in the Old House magazine.
Okay.
This is a pediment piece, or this has a kind of a shelf
Right.
here, but this came from a much longer piece
Okay.
that is called a pediment. And you would put those in, or at least they were ordered by architects in buildings that we can see all around here in the Urbana neighborhood and
Yeah.
throughout Champaign, and in late 19th century American domestic architecture and in some commercial architecture. These would be trim pieces above windows and doorways
Okay.
and openings in walls,
Right.
arches and walkthroughs.
Okay.
And so this particular piece came from a larger length of board from Preservation and Conservation Association
good.
over on Washington
Oh,
Street
yes.
in Champaign.
Good.
And I think this piece came out of a house in Charleston.
Okay.
So all I did was insert a piece of poplar in here
Okay.
and shorten it in order to display these.
Yes.
And this can mount on a wall. This works particularly well from an artistic standpoint for just setting underneath. I've seen it done underneath a sill.
Right.
Or underneath a piece of art that's
Right.
already on the wall. You just
Yeah.
set that underneath there
Very
as an
good.
adornment.
Yeah.
This one comes out of our house in my wife's closet where she hangs all her scarves on this
Oh,
one.
that's a
So
good
she
idea.
gave
Very-
me permission to bring this here
Thanks-
today. So
thanks
I
to
am, I
Connie.
am hostage to her fanciful
Well, every
choosing.
woman needs a place to hang her scarves. I will definitely agree with
I've
that.
been educated to that. Yes.
Okay, that's great. Well, then you have, I like these vase ones too. Those are nice.
It evolved from there.
Okay.
I realized that these almost exclusively come either in oak or pine.
Okay.
And oak is what I would prefer working in because
Mm-hmm.
pine is soft, even though the old pine is probably better than some contemporary
Right.
wood. But when I started thinking about it, I have a neighbor down the street, a couple neighbors down the street who are very skilled in woodworking.
Mm-hmm.
And all I had was a pile of sandpaper and a saw. And they would teach me. I stepped in there and they very kindly took me in and told me how they do their work. They make furniture
Uh-huh.
and other products that are very, very nice.
Okay.
And they told me what to watch out for. But I started thinking it might be nice if these could be presented, if these knobs can be presented in another kind of hardwood,
Right.
another contrasting color, and would have its own distinction without competing. So I started thinking about the knobs in a different kind of way
Okay.
again. So I deal primarily now in cherry and in walnut, but for instance, what you see here, and you made reference to the vase, this is hard maple.
Okay.
And the vase here, and what you see behind you
Right.
is, it was just something that came, the inspiration for that came from the Flourish flower shop downtown Champaign, where they had some pieces on the wall. The lady who owns and runs that had one on the wall there where I saw, I just got an idea for the figure that she had on the wall with some test tubes.
Yeah, okay.
So these pieces are a collaborative work between my neighbors.
Right.
The Schweitzers
Yeah.
were very gifted woodworkers.
Right.
And then the discovery of this concept downtown at the flower shop
Right.
at Flourish. And this particular one is a glass tube, which is bored, which matches the bore in the wood that I placed. And the tube itself was fabricated by glass blowers at the university.
Right. But I think that's unique because the knob is a little bit different, being the
Yes.
porcelain.
Yes.
And the frame that it is on, I'm not sure.
rosette.
The rosette, and then the wood
Yes.
is so pretty, and then that design that you that holds the vase. I mean, the whole thing almost has its own story.
Yes, and that's something that's where you lose sleep at night. I think people who do artwork know exactly what I'm talking
Right,
about. And
exactly.
this is totally foreign to me. So I've always slept like a baby all my life until I started getting this interest here. So you lay awake and you think about things that are possible.
Right, exactly. And I think you're very creative. And now here's
thank
another
you.
one that we're talking about
Yes.
with the wine corks.
Yes.
Now that's a pretty creative combination of knobs and corks.
That's one way of putting it. People would remark about that, and the Bouvin wine corkscrew
Right.
emporium that was over on Ray Street, I
Right.
believe, or Vine Street in Urbana. I stepped in there once and saw all the corks that they had in
Right.
a large vase, and I thought, I like seeing all the origins, all
Right.
the places from which these wines came from,
Yeah.
and the fonts, the lettering in the fonts. So my interest was very pedestrian and like a little boy. And I thought, is there some way that even that could be used?
Right.
So speaking with my buddies down the street, I started thinking about just wasting out a channel in this case, some walnut, and insetting those corks in there just to see how it would go. And they did quite well
Right.
at a couple of the shows that I went
Right.
to. So I've kept it up. Otherwise, they probably would not have had a life to them.
I think it's a great recycle effort too.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's one thing, is that a lot of this is green. This almost entirely is green product, except for the screws that I use.
Right, and it's supporting the PACA organization and
Yes.
all your involvement with people in Champaign-Urbana. We think that's terrific.
It's fun. Well, they've made it possible.
Yeah,
Well, I'm
that's
just
great.
a schoolboy.
Oh, you're doing great.
Learning about what people can do.
Well, now this one's a little more,
Yes.
a little different than the other ones. Tell us about that. Where did you get that wood?
This is a piece of sycamore that came out of the Schweitzer's burn box.
Okay.
So I'm kind of a closet dumpster diver, and I found that there, and the walnut came from the same place. So
Okay.
as you can see, it's just a matter of cutting it and preparing it and making a fit as you imagine it to be in order to present this delightful P&F Corbin knob, which is a Greco-style four-fold symmetry entry knob. And this sycamore is just a delightful resawn piece of wood that John Schweitzer furnished for me.
Okay.
That I rescued from somebody who was going to keep themselves warm in the wintertime.
That's great. Well, how about that knob now? That's a different kind of knob.
Yeah, that's the Corbin. This is a
Okay.
Corbin, which is a Greco classic style that they produced, which was quite attractive and was coveted during that time. And I didn't touch it. I left it in its original patina without putting any steel wool on it or putting in any kind of a cleaning solution. And I just set it out there. I felt like my wife told me it made a good color combination.
It does.
So that's what I did.
I'm glad you take her advice.
Yeah, I need to.
Okay. These are different now, these dark ones here. Tell us about these
Yes.
knobs and how this piece was created.
That pattern is called the lily.
Okay.
And that's an example of it being made in two different metals, of course. The center is brass, and the two side knobs are cast iron. And they represent, it's called the lily, but actually it represents what is a favorite theme for almost all the companies during that time, which was they would combine the floral and the geometric together. So you can see the horizontal band with the stars in the middle,
Yeah.
and some geometric picket fence angles underneath it, and then the floral of the lilies on the upper and the lower. And then the band is placed there with some more picket fence around the side. And these are little distinctive things that people wanted to see.
Wow.
And it's in cast iron and brass. So I put the brass on the walnut and the cast iron on the oak to raise that. And again, that walnut is burn box material that I just mortised out and laid on the oak.
Oh, that is, it's just wonderful. These knobs are so unique that they
Aren't they?
tell their own story, and the people that created them.
Yes.
And then to you
Yes.
to kind of rescue them and show them off for our generation and those coming after us what life was like using those kind of knobs and then combining it with this wonderful kind of art. It's terrific.
I particularly like it, Ginny, because it disappeared by the First World War.
Yeah.
A lot were turned in for the war effort for
Okay.
munitions, and then it also became too expensive. They were unknown before the Civil War, but after the Civil War, they were too expensive to manufacture.
Okay.
So things became stamped. They would just use
Okay.
sheet metal. They would use flat stock and press it in presses and create the impressions, which were not nearly as deep and they
Right.
weren't as fancy, and they became ultimately the plain knobs that we
Right.
all know today.
Yeah.
But it wasn't cost efficient, and a lot of these companies went out of business or were bought out by the largest ones like
Right.
Russell and Irwin, which became Russ Wine.
Oh,
And-
okay.
And they would be bought out, and only a limited production would
Yeah.
take place after that. So what we have is those that would be given to the war effort or would disappear from
Okay.
manufacturing.
Yeah.
So we have this 40 or 45-year window
Right.
where these things
That's
were made
amazing,
for our
isn't it? 40 to
benefit.
4 for 5 years.
Yeah.
Wow. And so do you go to antique stores to find these?
I go wherever I can.
Right.
So my wife gets fatigued when we need to stop at an antique store. Or if there's an estate sale in town,
Oh, okay.
I inquire about that. Some of these knobs came from an art historian at the university
Oh,
who left
good.
an estate, and he had, I think, 2 or 3 boxes in his
Good.
basement, which was just a huge treasure trove.
Wow, wonderful.
So you find wherever you can, and then there's
Right.
people who will have a couple in their garage,
Yeah,
or they're cleaning
right.
things out, and
Yeah.
they let you know about
That's-
it. So
that's
it
great.
becomes, the journey itself begins to be the fun. The people who help you do it,
Right.
and then where they're discovered.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate you telling us about this journey that you've been on. It's just so unique and very interesting how you've combined all of these
Thank
different
you,
things.
Jen.
And we appreciate you coming. And I know I met you at the Craft League Fair in Urbana. And so what other fairs do you show your work?
Well, it's a fledgling effort right now. I think it's only the last 2 or 3 years that I've actually left the house with these things in hand. I originally started with just the Mom's Day Craft Fair on campus
Okay.
at the Student Union.
Right.
But since then, for what is needed to generate sufficient stock to present to folks, I've gone to the Sugar Creek Festival,
Okay.
the Sugar Creek Art
Right.
Fair in the second week of July
Right.
in Bloomington, and the Sleepy Creek Vineyard this last fall,
Right.
as well as the Craft League
Right.
Fair
Yeah.
in November.
That's great. Well, we know you're busy doing this, and you also have a full-time job.
Yes.
And so we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today and to show us this wonderful art skill that you have. Thank you so much
Jenny,
for coming,
your
John.
interest. Thank you.
Our guest today has been Jon Bryan, and he's with Hobnob Art, and we've had a wonderful time looking at his work. We hope that you will continue your interest in art and maybe make your own art now.